Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Prime and Load. I'm here with Alex and Lee as ever, but we're joined by a guest expert for today's episode. We're looking at the British Army as it went into the War of American Independence and the myth that perhaps our American cousins like to think they defeated the biggest and the best army in the world. It certainly wasn't the biggest. Whether it was the best is perhaps something we can get into. But to help us unpack that, and I'm not entirely sure how to introduce our guest. I could say that Dr. Paul Knight is an academic who is also a reserve army officer and a reenactor. I could say that Major Knight is also an academic and so forth. But Paul is someone I've known for many years who's written extensively on this subject, as well as recreating it in one-to-one scale. So, Paul, I guess the easiest way is to dodge the introduction and ask you to introduce yourself and perhaps tell the listeners how you became interested in the British Army as the day job, but the British Army as a historical institution, and how all that came together.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Yes, my title depends on who I'm talking to, and usually it's just Paul because nobody else really cares, to be honest. I got I think an interest in British military history from my grandfather, who was at Dunkirk and who's at D-Day. So you grow up with that sort of family history. Just always been interested, like a lot of boys growing up. Had an interest in history, so went through university and ended up with a PhD at Liverpool on early modern social and economic history, so not military whatsoever. And at the same time, while going to university, I joined the officer training course, so that would be the ROTC for the American listeners, commissioned into the Territorial Army Royal Signals, which again would be the National Guard for the American listeners, which is now the Army Reserve in the British Army. During the First World War centenary, I became the project officer for the Army in the Northwest. Spent about best part of 5 years trying to convince people that Blackadder was not really good history. Great comedy, not so good history, and failed. And then shortly after that, I was appointed to become SO2, so Staff Officer Grade 2, so that's a major's rank. SO2 Historical Analysis at the Land Warfare Centre, which is near Salisbury. And there I work on historical lessons to support army lessons, giving background and context to current issues. So lots of this is doctrinally focused, and this is ties in with my interest in the American War of Independence, which I got into about 2000. I missed the 225th. I was serving in Kosovo at the time. And I know we'll talk about this at the end, but I managed to get to the 250th, so 25 years to get there.
So you were in the British Army, and that is kind of your interest led you to the Army rather than the Army led you to the interest. This is what it sounds like.
It's a bit of a mix. You've got work and pleasure, and actually I'm fortunate to combine the two of them at the moment with my job as a serving army officer, but working in history, and but also my interest in the American War of Independence. I've got interested in it I joined a reenactment group, the 47th Regiment of Foot, in 2000. But it was Matthew String's book, Zealand Bayonets. I know that's been mentioned already. That really awakened me to the tactical side of the army, of how it actually fought compared with the drill manual. And I know Matthew's book's been mentioned quite a lot. That is definitely required reading for anybody interested in the American War of Independence and the British Army for this period.
And since we're talking about this period, could you give us kind of a breakdown of the structure of the British Army in the 18th century? I know it's different than it is now, correct?
Yeah, the way I would describe it, and the key difference is if we go back to the 17th century and the War of the Three Kingdoms, the English Civil War, to use the older name. If you can imagine, there are three kingdoms: England, Scotland, and Ireland, each with its own parliament, each with its own army, linked together only really in the person of the monarch. Then you get the Act of Union between England and Scotland that creates a British army and a British establishment. But Ireland is still operating separately until the 1801 Act of Union, which then dissolves the Irish Parliament. The Irish establishment, part of the army, that is now brought in alignment with the more formally with a British army, and that's shown by the creation of a new Union flag. So the army in Ireland and the army in Britain have their own administrative structures. Commander-in-Chief, Quartermaster Generals, answerable to their own parliament. Although ultimately London is the capital that everybody answers to, so London will take priority over Dublin. But at the regimental level, regiments are moving backwards and forwards. There had been in the earlier period where there were different establishments on different regiments. So moving from Britain to Ireland, you need to recruit or discharge soldiers, highly inefficient. But by the time the period we're talking about, the pre-American War of Independence, the sizes of the battalions and the regiments has been stabilised. So regiments are moving between the two establishments, I think, pretty much seamlessly without really seeing any difference. So at one level, there is a British army that doesn't really matter that much. But administratively, when we look at the training and the doctrinal side of how the army operates, there is a big difference between what's happening in Britain and what's happening in Ireland in the years immediately before the revolution breaks out.
So it sounds like that Irish establishment and that British establishment are almost, would it be fair to say those are almost two different armies?
I think on one level, yes, different funding, different parliament, different orders to change things. So for example, when light companies are reintroduced in the early 1770s, they are introduced on the British establishment before the Irish establishment, only about 6 or 9 months apart. But it's a separate order to create light companies in the two parts of this, the wider British army. So it matters on that level. But a red coat is a red coat, and the superficial level, they all look the same.
And when we get to the structure of tactical units, how are those broken up?
They both operate in the same way. So I said there's a delay in the light companies being established or re-established in regiments in Ireland compared with Britain. But that aside, you've got a standard 10 company structure with a grenadier and a light company, 8 centre companies. Size of companies are all about the same size. It varies slightly over time. But they're all roughly 35 men and 3 officers and 2 sergeants, 1 drummer per company. So again, at that level, you can move a regiment from Britain to Ireland without any real change. The normal soldier, as it were, is not going to notice the difference.
And those are peace establishments, presumably, Paul, that you're quoting. I'm imagining a regiment will be recruited up to strength for hostilities.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the research I've been doing really takes us up to the outbreak of war. Trying to look at how the regiments were trained, what they were expected to do. Obviously, once war breaks out, then establishments are increased, recruiting is increased, training changes. One of the things which you'll be familiar with in the modern military is we talk about a war and the war. That in peacetime you're training for a war, sort of a generic war, but you're not sure what's next. And then once a war breaks out, you then start training for the war, and you can focus your attention on those issues. So yeah, once this the authorities in Britain are aware of what's happened at Battle Road, and 19th of April 1775, things will change, and then really I stopped looking at the training structure then, or the training procedures.
And when we start getting to the point where it's the war, like you said, how would you describe the strength or proficiency of the British Army, in 1775 at the start of the American Revolution?
I think, like any good historian, I'll say it depends.
Of course.
One of the things I've been looking at, and this is the big broad overview, is what the regiments have been doing beforehand. The 47th Foot, I know when they go to America in 1773, they actually sail before the war breaks out. They've got about 20% of their strength who have enough length of service to have served in the French and Indian War under Wolfe, etc., Battle of Quebec and all of that. So there's a cohort of old and bold, experienced veterans who are able to teach the younger soldiers about America, the conditions that they can expect to find in America, things like that. You've got other regiments who've got some relevant military experience. The 23rd Royal Welsh Fusiliers, they sailed to America at the same time as the 47th. They're a Minden regiment. They've served in Germany. So again, I think about 23-24% have enough length of service from them to have fought in Germany. So they've got some operational experience, but is it relevant? Well, we'll find out. But at least they have some. And then there are other regiments like the 10th Foot who play an important role in Boston in 1775. But they've not been in action since Malkerplaat, which I think is 1706. So you even at that regimental level, you're going to have a vast array of experience, setting aside the fact that some people may well be posted in and out. That's going to be another level of complication. So you are going to get some experience, you're going to get some lack of experience, some expertise, but an awful lot of young soldiers, as most armies are. Most soldiers are under 25 with 2 or 3 years service.
And when you talk about that 25% that have some experience in America, are these guys officers? Are they sergeants? Like, does that experience get them anywhere, maybe in a place of more influence?
This is a figure we've got for the enlisted men. Part of the annual inspection return actually shows the length of service by company, and this is where I've been able to extract the figure from. And I'm now sort of looking a bit more army-wide, and this figure seems to be quite consistent, of about 20, 23, 24%. I've not looked at the officers yet specifically, but the next piece of work I want to do is we have some incomplete muster rolls. And what I want to try and do is always put names to these people and see if we can carry them across and then work out rank and position. But 20% is too many for all the NCOs. So there will be some in the ranks who are, experienced, but still private soldiers.
It's a long time to be a private.
It's a long time to be private. I mean, one of the things I've noticed is that at the end of the French and Indian Wars, they're reducing the number of corporals and sergeants in the ranks, and they are going straight down as privates, which will be quite interesting. Ex-sergeants coming, joining the private soldiers again. But maybe these are the experienced people that have been kept on with a job, rather than make them lose their experience to the army. That's a piece of research you need to look into in the future. But one of the things which I was able to look at, again, on this question about experience, is each of the inspection returns has a list of manoeuvres that the regiments will undertake in order to be passed fit for service. And this is the key phrase that you really want in your annual report that says this regiment is good to go. And I looked at the report for the 47th in 1772. That's the last year before they go overseas, and it's quite extensive. But the thing I got interested in was, what does good look like? And that means you then got to look across the army to try and get some sort of comparator, because is this a good pass? Is it an okay pass? And are generals just signing these off willy-nilly and just being quite cursory, or are they actually trying to be very serious and professional about this? And the interesting line, this one from the 47th, that in Charlesfort, which is Kinsale, in Cork, in Southern Ireland, extensive series of manoeuvres that they are performing, but the very last line, it says everything is performed at a double quick time. So these guys are a whole series of complicated manoeuvres at speed, which suggests open order, trail arms, trail firelocks, all those sorts of things. And it looks like you've got this old and bold of North American experience teaching the youngsters or influencing the youngsters how to fight in North America before you go there. Not every regiment is performing that. And, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, they have a much more pedestrian series of manoeuvres that they're performing. So you can see immediately there's a big variation in how the army is being examined and tested and proven to be fit for service.
So on that kind of note of being tested for fit for service, can you walk us through what training looks like for the John Robert Shaws and Roger Lambs and Tommy Adkins who joined the Colours in the 60s and 70s. When you're a new recruit in the British Army, how do you get to that point of being proficient enough to perform a complex series of maneuvers?
Well, the recruit training is one thing I've not really delved into in a great amount of detail, but what we do see is comments on new men in these reports, which are taken as being men who are not quite there yet. So, for example, in 1767, the 47th had been back in Ireland from North America for about 3 years. They're getting comments talking about the new men recruited, and this is basically the regiments come home, discharged those who are time expired, not fit for service anymore, the contracts, if they recruited on the war time only contract, and started recruiting new men again. And we'll find this quite a lot, that there will be complaints that a regiment is not fit for service, but usually that something is there's a training regime going on at the regimental level. And he mentioned Roger Lamb. He joins the 9th Foot. 1772, they are really slated. The official report says this regiment is a very bad one. So there's no messing around here. Now, they have just got back from the Caribbean. They've been overseas for 10 years, so it's acceptable. But then the following year, it says, much mended since last review, and it will be better in the next. So you can see that they are bringing men up bit by bit. But even by the time the regiment goes overseas in 1776, they are still not fit for service. Now, that doesn't stop them performing well in North America. That's a separate thing. But they are struggling to recruit the numbers and bring them up to save over this 4 or 5 year period.
And Paul, can you describe for us what one of these inspections looks like in terms of the maneuvers that the men? I mean, like, are we talking about deploying into line of battle? Are we talking about sort of what is involved in the generals certifying, okay, you've gone through this many maneuvers, you're fit for service? What does this look like?
Again, I mean, this can vary massively. I found one, I think it's the 3rd Foot off the top of my head. In Britain, they don't appear to have done any manoeuvres and they've been signed off fit for service. I can only assume it was torrential rain outside and nobody was doing anything, but they've been past fit for service. But the ones being conducted in Britain are almost entirely single battalions. The ones in Ireland could be a single battalion, but they could also be small divisional manoeuvres of usually about 6 infantry battalions into 2 brigades with cavalry and artillery. And these will take place at Phoenix Park outside Dublin twice a year. So there's a huge variation of what's going on. But they are manoeuvring from line into column. They are sending off the composite battalions of the flank companies out into the wooded areas of Phoenix Park. They are practicing obstacle crossing, which is very important because we see this at Northbridge Concord and things go wrong. They have practiced this. They will form square because, again, the British Army is expecting to go to war in Europe where there's cavalry. So you practice forming square, advancing and retiring in a whole range of manoeuvres. Lots of volley firing going on as well. Always ends up with a volley and a charge, and I'm assuming the charge is towards the Inspector General for a big finale and a big huzzah. So yeah, they can be extremely extensive, and particularly these in Phoenix Park. Remember, armies fight as divisions. Armies do not fight as single battalions. So this is an army which is training for going overseas, operational, sort of expeditionary warfare, much higher standard. And also, the lieutenant colonels will be stepping up to become brigadiers. So this is how the army is training itself for war. What's happening in Britain, I think, looks a lot more like a gendarmerie in support of civil authorities to put down riots, anti-smuggling duties, things like that. Yeah, you don't get regiments going from Ireland to Britain. You get regiments going from Britain to Ireland. And that's an important thing. It's almost like they're stepping up in the military training in preparation for going overseas.
So in some ways, then Ireland is for Britain what the Magdeburg and Potsdam reviews are for Prussia. It's a more realistic, large scale. Today we would say war games, right? That are trying to prepare the men for active combat operations. That's what's going on in Ireland.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I know in Britain they do the big concentrations and camps, but they're not used as part of this inspection process, so we don't have the information. But this is your battalion as part of a division going through the manoeuvres and the colonels, etc., being marked off on this. This is your annual inspection. So yes, it does sound like the same process.
And would you say there's innovation going on in Ireland? Is the experience of these Irish camps one of the reasons why we see maybe a more focus on light infantry tactics in the 1770s in the British Army?
I think there is, because the Commander-in-Chief Ireland, remember this is a separate post from Commander-in-Chief Britain, Commander-in-Chief Ireland is Townsend, who had been Wolfe's brigadier and succeeded Wolfe after the Battle of Quebec. So I said, the light companies are introduced into Ireland a year later than in Britain, but he issues his light infantry doctrine in May 1772, and we know this is being followed. I said, the inspection return I mentioned with the 47th doing everything at the double quick time. That's in June 1772. That's a month later. So these are ahead of the curve. But I think the following year, the 24th Foot is pulled up because it's drawing its light company up 3 deep, contrary to orders. And, standardly, we have light troops operating in two deep all the time. So it looks like it's been implemented, although not universally. And, within these big manoeuvres, you've got the lights and the grenadiers covering manoeuvres, going off on specific tasks. You've got the mass, I think, to do these interesting manoeuvres.
How much of it, Paul, do you think is personalities and almost luck, if you like, that Ireland is the training ground for the army and Ireland happens to be commanded by an officer with North American experience? I mean, had, let's say, somebody who'd been a brigadier in Germany in the 7 Years' War ended up with that job, would that have swung things, or was Ireland the polishing ground regardless, and they went through everything?
I think Townsend's position there must have been important. But I think, and also a lot of this is down to the regimental experience, but also that and the commanding officer at the time, and then as now commanding officers are responsible for the training of their battalions. So the fact that the 47th is doing everything double quick time, where does this come from? This is the whole battalion at speed. Is this it's just this institutional memory of these people coming, bringing information back, and we're going to America again, so this is how we bring it out. There's no centralized infantry training school to capture all these ideas. Now, I would caveat that saying no one's intending to go to war in America in 1775. There are political crises in Europe that could have gone hot, and we would have been fighting in Europe. Corsican crisis. There's one with Spain over the Falkland Islands. Okay, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is about to implode. These officers have got one eye on European warfare, but I think if you're going to America, you will focus on that.
Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit off of script here, because I've got a fascinating email last week from one of our listeners named Michael Lund, who's also a reenactor. He's in the Mount Vernon reenactment right now, getting rained on, sadly, I would imagine. So Paul, you've been referencing this idea, talking about the 47th and the 23rd, right, of the sort of the army that had North American experience of the French and Indian War, and the army that had German experience in the 7 Years' War, right? And I think it's fascinating because it would be, I think, extremely natural to assume the folks who had North American experience are going to be more, their experience is going to be more relevant for the fighting in North America in the American War of Independence, right? But this listener, Michael, sent me a snippet of the diary of Frederick Mackenzie, who's an officer in the 23rd. And he describes the fighting at Battle Road and sort of the specific tactics the 23rd are using there. And it seems very much like they are applying German tactical solutions to what's going on at Lexington and Concord. And he describes sending out marksmen to sort of occupy positions in the advance of the battalion in order to cover the battalion. So today, in a post-Napoleonic framework, we would say sending out skirmishers to cover the battalion, right? Do you think that there's enough of a tactical difference between the folks who are in North America and the folks who are over in Europe at Minden, Minden regiments, that they would be applying? They're there on the same battlefield, but they're going to be solving tactical problems in different ways based on this difference. Is that experience of North America and Germany in the 7 Years' War important enough that it's staying with these units?
I think once you're in a particular theatre, then you should be picking up best practice, and we know that Howe, Gage, etc., are trying to influence and I suspect uniform and codify how their army is operating in Boston. I mean, one of the things that I noticed there's this question over 2 ranks and 3 ranks, and eventually everyone's codified it. Everybody will operate in 2 ranks. When you look at the inspection returns, colonels can do 2 ranks or 3 ranks, and some of them actually swap between one and the other partway through the manoeuvres. So don't ask me how they do that, but they do. So it's not an either or, it's a which one fits best. Yeah, I mean, the 23rd have the light company before they go out to America. That 1772 inspection return, I'm just trying to find it. The light company is doing something, but it's not specified what they're doing. So yeah, you've got these light company, these new light companies are being formed and they'll be training. But the question is, what do you do with us? And this is where they'll be picking up the experience from the North American commanders, because you've got Gage and Howe, both of which are North American experts, and you do what the general says. I'm not so familiar with light tactics in Europe. I mean, this is something I've dipped into from time to time, but it doesn't seem to be as prevalent as it was in North America, which really seems to be a big training school for the development of these tactics. So I may throw that to the European experts to say, what's the European influence on what's happening.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to go off script as well. So we're talking a lot about lessons learned, and I know in the modern military there's a formal way of communicating those kinds of things and after action reports and things like that. At this point, is there a formalized way of applying lessons learned in theater to training?
I don't think there is once the army is broken up. So, you take like Wolfe going up the St. Lawrence or the equivalent army that's coming up from, New York up towards Montreal in the 1750s and 60s, that, they would have adopted a way of working and developed, the tactics for working in wooded areas, in those temperatures with the Great Lakes and the rivers. But then that ends and everyone goes back to normal garrisons. So there's 10 years between the two. I think there is an institutional memory between serving personnel then, which stays, and if it's relevant, you can dig it out again. So yeah, we've Townsend is one of Wolfe's brigadiers. We also talk about General Howe for the Revolution War, but he commands Wolfe's Composite Light Battalion at Quebec. Coincidentally, his battalion 2IC was from the 47th. Now, that's a Major Hussey who dies in Canada, but the 47th Light Company is there. Is this memory being kept on? And other light companies as well. This is institutional memory being kept in, even once light companies are disestablished. There doesn't seem to be a formal way, but when light companies return in the early 1770s, Townsend produces his orders. Also got General Howe, which is more famously known. And they are probably just writing down what they've done in the past. They're not generating anything new because where the experience come from. They're codifying probably what was just generally good practice and passing it out to the army to be implemented by everybody else.
Do you get anything, Paul, akin to the? I mean, thinking of the next piece in the 1780s after this war, that there is more of a defined debate between the American school that's come out of the war we're just going into and the European school is more, I suppose, theorists comparing ideas rather than within the units. So is that debate not really present in the 60s and 70s in the same way?
I mean, it doesn't seem to be, because there's no light there's no light company within the battalions. There's no requirement to do this. It's going back to pre 7 Years' War, French Indian War, and just everybody is line plus your grenadier company. So there really isn't the scope to have that intellectual debate about it. And by the time they re-establish and the orders come out, then you're pretty much straight into the war. So get on with it.
So, Paul, can you just briefly walk us through, you've talked about Townsend and Howe and their ideas, of sort of training in Ireland. What does this practically do for the war in North America? How does this experience of training in Ireland change the British Army, make the British Army a more effective institution on the battlefields of the American War of Independence?
I think it's created a mindset of adaptability. Again, we have this stereotype of the British Army is either the best in the world, full of veterans who are indestructible, or the complete bunch of idiots who don't know what they're doing. Actually, the reality is always somewhere in between, and this adaptability to overcome and deal with the problems that's immediately in front of you. And we see this most obviously in the uniforms, the regulation. So regulation uniform quickly disappears into something which is far more practical. I think you've also got things like by the time you've got up into Canada and you're fighting around Quebec, whole battalions are being you see whole battalions using these innovative tactics. No one's standing shoulder to shoulder doing volley firing. Everybody's moving swiftly. Everybody's in extended order. Where does this come from? If you try and introduce stuff like that very quickly, you are going to get chaos. And there must have been this mindset of accepting these new ideas and perhaps even practicing them and not being resistant to change. This is this adaptability, which I think is a key thing, which allows the army actually to fight from the woods of Quebec down to the more open plains of the central colonies and the extreme heats of operating around Philadelphia and New Jersey and Virginia, places like that. It just I think it creates a mindset of adaptability.
I mean, just thinking of the first time they go in. Well, not the first time they go to, but the first time they go to a major set piece battle, if you like. We've got Bunker Hill with the anniversary coming up, which I dare say, in terms of stereotypes, is very much dumb Brits marching shoulder to shoulder and being shot down by plucky colonials. I'm guessing, based on what you said and what little I do know of the details of that action, that again there's more flexibility there, even within a set piece battle. Is that perhaps something that you'd want to expand on?
I mean, for me, Bunker Hill it's an emergency. If the rebels are still in possession of the hilltop locations, then the British position in Boston is untenable. So that doesn't really give you a lot of scope to plan anything particularly well finessed. Even so, what I think seems to be happening is, again, the lights and the grenadier companies are being sent around the back of Bunker Hill to try and reach the neck and try and cut off the the rebel position. Now it doesn't work, but that's another matter. They get stuck on this rail fence and don't progress any further. At the same time, the battalions are fixing the rebels in the Bunker Hill position so they don't run away. In order to I think this is what they're trying to do: fix the enemy in the position, get round the back, force them to surrender. It doesn't work. Or and then you end up with these frontal assaults straight up the hill, which creates the most costly battle for the British Army in the entire revolution. However, at the end of the day, the British are in position on the top, and they've achieved the commander's intent. There's no finesse about it, but I don't think there's any time for finessing. It's just we have to do this now, otherwise it's game over. Very heavily, lots of casualties. Again. There's nothing finessed about it. There's no ability to deliver a finesse complex plan of attack, which is going to save lives. And sometimes it just has to be done. So, yeah, it's a hard battle to justify, but it is just bags of smoke and straight up the middle, as we'd say today.
Can I ask 2 follow-up questions about the British Army in the War of Independence before we move on and maybe talk about reenactments or something like this? What's something that you wish American listeners knew about the British Army in the American War?
Well, the first one is that we are the good guys. We are sent to America to protect the loyal Americans who just want to stay within the empire. That is what the British Army is sent there for. We are not there to oppress people. There are political problems, but politics and military action are usually, let's remove them. The British government has got no money. We need to sort out taxation. We've got no money because of the last war that you started, and we helped to bankroll to protect you from the French and the French and Indians, etc. So why would a British soldier want to go and oppress a fellow Briton living in America? Particularly when you've got regiments who have been to America before. Think of all those regiments who fought in the French and Indian Wars who are then returning with a cohort of people who have been to America. However, political situation has changed, and I suspect the soldiers are very, very confused as what's going on. But certainly the intent is to protect the loyal Americans. Hopefully that was controversial enough.
Yeah, exactly. Too bad the good guys lost, huh? Yeah. So second question: what would you like a listener in the UK? What do you think maybe they don't know about the British Army? How did they conceptualize the British Army incorrectly in the American War?
We don't really study the American War of Independence particularly well. There's trying to think of the author of the book. Is it O'Shaughnessy who wrote 3 Victories and a Defeat?
Yeah, Brendan Sims, but yes, very close.
Brendan Sims, yeah. Yes, we'll do Minden, we'll do Quebec, we'll do those great victories, and we'll do Waterloo, supported by Sharpe and the Peninsula. Losing a war is not the same as fighting it badly. Okay, I think the British Army is very efficient. It knows what to do. The fact that it can't do it, it's given mission impossible. I don't think the British Army can win the American War of Independence once the fighting starts. That does not mean to say it does not fight efficiently and effectively and fulfill its duty in a very intelligent manner.
I have heard in passing people kind of almost comparing it to almost a Vietnam sort of scenario where you can win the battles, but it doesn't do anything for the outcome.
No, ultimately, Saratoga, I think, puts the writing on the wall. Yorktown, definitely, it knocks the political will to maintain the field armies and try and keep fighting, and that is always the deciding factor, is that political will to maintain the war.
I think it's interesting, though, and especially the 4 of us sort of sitting here sort of focusing on the relevance of history to the present. It's possible to learn the wrong lessons from the past. And right after Saratoga, a couple of British officers are writing letters back and forth to each other. And they say, well, we've been in this situation before. Look at what happened to Cumberland at Clostershaven, right? We could get out of Saratoga in the same way that sort of he got out of that, and of course it doesn't end up happening that way. So I do think the people in the past would be a little bit more self-conscious and self-aware than sometimes we give them credit for. They are thinking about their situations with the framework of recent history in mind, and you can see that at Saratoga. You can also look and see that in how the British Army is training before the war in Ireland, and with the experience of both Germany and North America.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing quite a lot of work a few years ago on the British Army in 1940, and we weren't looking at Dunkirk, but we all know it ends up at Dunkirk, and there's Norway as well. And there's a good quote from one of the Guards officers saying, "Why are we practicing retirements and retreats?" And the more experienced Sergeant Major turns around and says, "Because we start every war going backwards." And it takes a couple of years to get to Saratoga, but usually we can. Britain is not a particularly military society in that respect. The Navy is the pride at this time. The Army is always on a back foot while it gets itself into the right mindset, grows in size, sorts out all those peacetime issues. There's always a lack of money for training, despite what we've been discussing. It's getting itself into the right mindset, and I think this is a common theme across British history or British military history over the centuries. We always get caught with our pants down,
and that's why it's so important to be able to hire Germans and Native Americans and other allies to fight alongside you, right? To sort of supplement the army of at this time, a nation that doesn't have the same population of France or Austria or Russia. You all are trying to run great power wars on a budget. And in your defense, in the 18th century, you do it very well.
Yeah, I think we lose we lose the American colonies, but then you look at the other bits of the wider American War of Independence, the Caribbean, Quebec, the UK mainland itself, are all Gibraltar, all defended well and maintained. There's a whole other conversations we had about the war outside of the 13 colonies.
So, Alex, your question kind of made me think, and if it's possible, could you give kind of a brief comparison and between the British Army at the beginning of the American Revolution? Because like we mentioned before, we always, at least on this side, we're always told the best army in the world. When we put that story up against historical fact, how does that kind of shake down? Where does the British Army compare in the rest of European context?
It is always a very small army. Britain uses its navy and its financial might to keep other armies in the war, particularly in Europe in the 7 Years' War, and then I think Andrew would agree in the Napoleonic Wars. Britain is bankrolling a lot of the people to tie down the French, usually, and we will turn up with a relatively small army, but with a big navy. There's an idea actually that I guess again jumping forward a couple of decades, but what is Wellington doing at Lisbon? And at Cadiz and La Coruna, he's securing the ports to give the navy freedom of operation. And that is what the army does. The fact he ends up advancing it inland and taking on the French army is quite unusual, but it's not the primary aim of the army. It's securing ports to give the navy freedom of movement. Do we see this in America, where Britain maintains control of most of the ports on the eastern seaboard? Really, is that the same sort of theory that's coming along, or same sort of idea? I don't know. There's a conversation to be had there. But, we do not deliver massive armies. You look at Minden, which is a great victory for the British Army. You look at how many British and Hanoverian battalions are there compared with the Germans. Yeah, we are a sideshow, tucked away to one side. But we think it's a great victory.
Yeah, but I guess I would say, if you look at compare the British Army size to the French Army at the time, the Prussian Army at the time, the Austrians, the Russians, all of these armies are doing larger scale encampments, but I don't think that's necessarily a knock on the British Army. It's because the British Army is in scale so much smaller than these other forces, right? I do think probably man for man, the British Army is one of the best trained armies in the 18th century. I do think, though, the scale problem is why you need the Hessians and you need the Brunswickers and you need the Hanoverians to sort of, sort of carry the load, to sort of help the army out. Horace Walpole describes the Hessians as the Triarii of Great Britain, and I think there's something to be said there, as far as, it's a nice army in the realm of European great powers, but you can only do so much with the size that you have.
Yeah, I think the hiring of Hessians and similar armies is perfectly normal in the 18th century. I know it's demonized in the popular American version of the revolution. It's entirely normal because again, Britain has had a military dictatorship under in the Commonwealth under Cromwell. We don't want a big standing army, and that's something we actually have in common with the American colonies because they're expensive and they are linked with tyranny and oppression as we see in some of the European states. So we don't want the cost of it. We don't want the political instability of it. But we recognise that practically you need a standing army. Without that, you're vulnerable. But how do you expand it massively in wartime? And again, this is probably a question that George Washington has to deal with. How do you turn all those recruits who are turning up around Boston into a functioning army? And as the war goes on, he goes for a more and more conventional European army, in emulation of what the British start off with, I think. So this is how you win wars in the 18th century. But scaling it up is a big question, particularly if you lose 5,000 or 6,000 at Saratoga. That's a big chunk of the British Army that's gone and can't be replaced.
Yeah, and I will say, not just in the popular version, it's right there in the Declaration of Independence, right? He's transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of destruction or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's been a narrative in our version of it since the inception of the United States. But by the same token, I will say that the point that you've just raised, Paul, about the sort of fear of tyranny in Britain, and certainly I think of it in the 17th century, but also in the War of Spanish Succession, the 9 Years' War period, where, of course, the great fear is Louis XIV, and the tyranny and absolutism that is present in France is a huge part of British identity. That Whiggish republicanism, that sort of those ideologies that are opposed to absolutism, opposed to standing armies, they're there over with you all in the UK, and only by the 1760s and 70s have they migrated to the United States and sort of create a huge headache for you all. So it's to some extent, I don't necessarily dispute the forces of law and order, but it's also a imperial crisis in some ways of your own making, right? I mean, we're just stealing ideas from you in order to create the United States in some ways, right?
Yeah, and there's an argument: is the American War of Independence, is that the second English Civil War, the War of the Three Kingdoms? Where does authority lie? Is it with the monarch? Is it with Parliament? Or actually, is it with Congress? That for me is the crux. And we can be take into the realm of politics and politicians and who wants what, and the people who run the American colonies, if they get rid of Britain, they can get away with that inconvenience and just do what they want. That's like that's one argument out there, I think, which is goes back to who runs the country.
That's the fascinating thing in the American Constitution. We have these three little words: "We the people." That might be where the authority resides. So it's a fascinating difference that is evolved in the last few hundred years between our cultures. So, tell us a little bit about Battle Road. What was it like being over there as a soldier in the UK Army today? Get to come over to the United States and try to put down this rebellion one more time.
It was fantastic. The Battle Road team, Jim Hollister, I know you had him and Jared on here, recently. they did a really good job, I think, pulling together so many disparate parts. I mean, I know that there were, Lexington Green is organised by somebody else, and there's Northbridge Concord, and there's Battle Road, and there's all these different agencies all doing their own thing. But the whole experience, when you get those experiences where all you can see is 18th century around you, you start to get the whole feel of it. And I know you've had conversations here about whether you can learn from being at an immersive event and being totally 18th century. I don't know whether learn is the right word, but it certainly gives you a feel of what was going on and sort of the practical problems. And, people are getting tired by the end of the day, and you're chivying them along exactly as 250 years ago. Very real problems, very realistic problems. We had all the boos, as you'd expect, but also the rounds of applause to, thank all the redcoats for turning out and doing their thing. I think, very, very welcoming people of Massachusetts, and actually the people who hosted us as well were actually fantastic in helping us get across the Atlantic, trying to minimise all the palaver of the kit we needed to bring and muskets and all that sort of stuff. A very, very long day. But actually, again, we don't tend to do really long, intensive days that gets you to the point at which you are struggling to think what's going on. And I know some people did the whole, did extended marches as well, which added to the effect. But we had a fantastic time. I'm looking forward to coming back next year.
How many of your guys ended up coming over?
We brought 4 over, and I know there's some from 2 of the other groups as well. But I think I've proved the concept. So we're talking about White Plains in October next year. So there's already more people interested in coming. Partly it's the time of the year because it's Easter weekend for us, which is, so that's the beginning of our holiday. So a lot of people with families were tied up with that. Some people are working because it's the beginning of the main hospitality season. Certainly bringing more over. There's certainly more interest already for October next year. So let's see what we can do.
Could you perhaps say a bit, Paul? Obviously, we heard about American War of Independence reenactment on that side of the Atlantic in our previous episode, but I guess for the contrast for the American listeners and perhaps for the edification and maybe the potential recruitment of the British listeners, could you give us a little bit of a rundown on what the scene is like on this side of the water? It's certainly a growing era in terms of 18th century reenactment, I think.
Yeah, it's growing. It's always been a small period. 18th century in general is small in the UK. English Civil War, War of the Three Kingdoms, is big and popular and cheap to do. And then Napoleonic is all equally, European wide is big. As Andrew and I have both done both done Napoleonic. We know this. It's a cheaper period and some great battlefields to go to in Europe, particularly with Waterloo being so close. So 18th century is an expensive period that fits in between these 2 really big periods. 47th Foot is about 35 years old. It was actually created in the aftermath of the famous visit to Britain by the American groups in the late 80s. I think there's one group in the UK that's older than the 47th, but they don't tend to travel much outside of their home area. So I think the 47th is the oldest group, which travels around the country. And I think apart from that one group I mentioned, Crown Forces, I think I'm the senior person, so I feel my age after a while. I think with the approach of the 250th and, COVID as well helped actually, with the creation of 2 new groups who are doing really, really well, 23rd and the 33rd. While some of the existing groups lost a lot of members during COVID, not dying, but we had an extended family group who got to that point of retiring, and that knocks your numbers a bit. So with there's been different levels of success over the last couple of years, but the period is growing. It's on the up. There's more people getting to events, groups working together, and we'll see how long we can maintain this interest in the period.
I do have another question, a little off script. So being in the modern military, does that sort of modern military mindset creep into your reenacting at all, or into your research or anything like that?
I think, as with all research, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, there are so many big gaps that filling in the gaps, you've got to use your experience and, call it common sense or whatever it is. So, I mean, one of the things that I started doing quite a few years ago was, what do officers do in this period? And, you tend to get a lot of officers who are, standing around and looking smart across reenactment in general. What do officers do? And it's never really written down. So you've got your drill manuals for the soldiers, the snippets of what officers are doing, and trying to fill in this gap. And, and as you get more experience and more, get more reading and more research comes out, you can fill in the gap. So I think from the very beginning, I sort of looked at it because the corporals are in the ranks, so are they sorting out that sort of interior economy of what's happening with the private soldiers? You've got your sergeants, who are the experienced people outside the firing part of the company, as it were. Are those the guys who are given the immediate orders? And then the officer who's trying to look 2 or 3 stages ahead, always playing the chess game. So I want to be over there on that hill, loaded, ready to fire in that direction. That's where I want to be in a few moves' time. What do, sergeant, march the company up the hill when you're there, get them loaded, sort of thing? Is that's what's happening? And that's what I try to look at. And this is, I think, brings in a bit of your modern, your personal experience. So yeah, it's filling in the gaps, and you get these common themes throughout history, throughout military history, that don't change. Feet get sore, it rains, you get wet. Your canteen is heavy but never carries enough water. When I was looking at Battle Road, for example, or that big march, it's 35 miles. Show me anybody who could do that today and not be absolutely chin-strapped by the end of 35 miles, and the military cohesion is starting to break down, and we talk about panic. I think these guys are just absolutely exhausted, even without being shot at. This is the sort of things that you can take from the modern backwards, so long as you are aware that you are imposing the modern onto history. And but if you get better evidence, you have to adjust your views accordingly. But yeah, helps with filling in the gaps, I think.
Great. And now I think we'll move on to our last little section, Murmurs in the Camp section. And this one I think we'll keep pretty general, and we'll go kind of around the horn and talk about what's going on in everybody's history and reenacting lives. So Alex, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the end of the semester here for me. I'm sort of finishing up my teaching for this academic year. It's been a wonderful year at Franciscan. I'm looking forward to being back in the fall. But as a result, I'll be doing some archival research. The university has access to the state papers online, so I'll be doing a lot of sort of work on that, and looking into the Duke of Cumberland's papers as well over the summer. I just kind of a quiet few weeks gearing up for the Memorial Day reenactments. I mean, Lee, I know you're doing Soldiers Through the Ages up at Niagara. There's a large gathering of Prussians and Hessians at Fort Ligonier in Pennsylvania as a result of the sort of museum collections they have there related to the 7 Years' War. So all in all, things are going pretty well. If you're in Western Pennsylvania in the course of Memorial Day weekend, stop by and check us out at Ligonier.
Paul, do you want to go next?
Well, I'm busy at work. I don't get a down period as such, and we'll see what questions I get when I get into the back into the office after a bank holiday weekend, which is over here. I'm finishing off a book which it's actually a First World War book, totally off topic. What I think is the most perfectly fought battle of the First World War, which is in Iraq, and Second Battle of Ramadi. So trying to get that finished off. But for the 18th century, as I alluded to earlier, I'm trying to work through this big spreadsheet of the muster rolls for the 47th Foot in the to try and track some of the careers of these soldiers, to try and see if we can work out who these veterans are, what rank they're in, what position they're in, and see what happens to them. So that's my sort of slow burn project, and once I've completed that, I'll see if there's anything I can develop from it.
Awesome. Andrew?
I'm plugging away at various projects. The book on amphibious warfare that I'm editing is slowly coming together now. We'll hopefully have some of the contributors, maybe get them on here for an episode on that when it's finally out. But just waiting for the last couple of chapters to come in now and finishing off my introduction. But if I can get a cheeky plug in, the thing I've actually been doing today before recording this is being a free proofreader and copy editor for a project my wife's working on. Lucy is an art historian specialising in the 18th century, and she's got a big exhibition, and the catalogue of the exhibition was what I was looking at, which I think will actually be up and running by the time this episode goes live. So anybody in the English Midlands, in the exhibitions in Derby. It's on an artist, Joseph Wright of Derby, and the museum where Lucy works holds the world's biggest collection of his work. I have to say, for podcast listeners who are purely military fans, that there are 2 drawings out of 60 odd that feature the Great Siege of Gibraltar, which Paul mentioned in passing in the chat today. So whether you think it's worth seeing just for those, but I would hope for many of us, the interest extends beyond just the military, and there's some great cultural stuff in there. Certainly some insights that I found fascinating. So yeah, go see Lucy's exhibition if you can.
Awesome.
What about yourself?
And like Alex, my semester will be coming to an end pretty soon, and then we can start the summer. And I think this summer the real big thing is going to be definitely recording more episodes, hopefully also being able to bring possibly some more pieces of content. Maybe we'll make some maps and stuff to go along with some future episodes, but trying to bolster the podcast and making it more exciting for our listeners. I think that's our big push for this summer. So yeah. So thank you, Paul, very much for coming on. I think this was a great conversation, and hopefully we'll see you again over here, and maybe next year at White Plains. That'd be pretty great.
No, thank you very much for inviting me, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
That's it for this episode of Prime and Load. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend and leave us a review. It really helps, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. This episode was hosted by Drs. Alexander Burns and Andrew Bamford, produced by Lee Gugino. Prime and Load is a Historic Studios podcast.